On the morning of August 6, 1977, as Jimmy Carter occupied the White House and Star Wars dominated theatres, life moved at an unhurried pace in Pelham, Georgia, a small town of approximately 4,500 residents, located about 20 miles north of Thomasville in Mitchell County. For Tom Dawson, a 63-year-old retired automobile salesman living in a trailer home on Varda Road with his wife and daughter, the day began routinely enough. He rose early, took his daughter to visit their neighbour Linda Colby, and spent some time playing with the Colbys' infant son. Looking outside, Dawson decided conditions seemed perfect for fishing. At approximately 10:30 that morning, he set out with his two dogs to inspect his favourite fishing pond. His path led through a pasture where 20 to 40 cattle grazed peacefully as he approached the grove of trees surrounding the water. Nothing in the quiet rural setting hinted at the extraordinary encounter that was about to take place, challenging the very limits of believability. Dawson had just crossed through the gate surrounding the pond when something impossible happened. A circular spacecraft materialised suddenly between the trees, hovering just a few feet above the ground directly in front of him. He would later describe it as approximately 50 feet in diameter and 15 feet high, with a dome on top and portholes encircling its midsection. The craft made no sound but displayed a remarkable property. It rapidly changed colours, cycling through various hues in swift succession. In that same instant, Dawson found himself completely immobilised, as if frozen in place by some invisible force. His dogs likewise became paralysed, as did all the cattle in the field. In his later account to researchers, Dawson described one of his dogs frozen with a leg suspended in mid-air, arrested mid-step. For several seconds, Dawson could only observe helplessly as events unfolded before him. Then a hatch opened on the underside of the craft. A ramp extended downward to the ground below. From the spacecraft emerged 7 humanoid beings, approximately 5 feet tall. According to Dawson's later testimony, they consisted of 5 males and 2 females. The first being, whom Dawson instinctively identified as their leader, stepped cautiously onto the ramp, as if testing the ground's solidity, before motioning for the others to follow. 2 of the beings took positions at the hatch, appearing to serve as sentries. All 7 entities shared distinctive physiological features that marked them as definitely non-human. Their skin was stark white as a flour sack in Dawson's words. They possessed sharp, upturned noses and pointed ears. Most striking of all, they had no necks whatsoever. Their heads sat directly upon their shoulders. Some wore tight-fitting one-piece suits of a material Dawson struggled to describe. Beautiful was an adjective he repeatedly used, with a texture and colour unlike anything terrestrial. Their footwear ended in distinctive upturned toes, adding to their otherworldly appearance. Others, specifically 1 male and 1 female, wore nothing at all, which allowed Dawson to observe that their bodies were entirely devoid of hair. The beings communicated among themselves using high-pitched, shrill vocalizations that sounded to Dawson like unintelligible gibberish. The beings approached Dawson cautiously. Without speaking directly to him, they began what appeared to be a methodical physical examination. They placed what Dawson described as a skull cap-like device on his head. This apparatus connected via cords to a hoop-shaped instrument bearing multiple dials. Dawson recalled that this hoop was approximately the size of a hula hoop. The entities proceeded to drop his trousers and lift his shirt, passing the hoop-shaped device over different parts of his body. In one version of his testimony, Dawson also described how they attached small suction cup-like devices, bright orange in colour, to various parts of his body, continuing to take readings from the dials throughout this procedure. It was at this point that the encounter took its most bizarre turn, one that would strain credulity even within UFO research circles, already accustomed to the strange. From inside the spacecraft, a loud human voice suddenly called out, "I am Jimmy Hoffa! I am Jimmy Hoffa! I am Jimmy Hoffa!" The voice attempted a fourth repetition, but was abruptly cut off, as if someone had placed a hand over the speaker's mouth. It was not heard again. This seemingly absurd declaration added a surreal dimension to the encounter. Jimmy Hoffa, the controversial Labour leader and former Teamsters Union president, had disappeared under mysterious circumstances just 2 years earlier, on July 30th, 1975, from a restaurant parking lot in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. His fate remained one of America's most prominent unsolved mysteries. Following this unexpected interruption, the beings hastily concluded their examination. They removed the skull-cap device from Dawson's head and gathered their equipment. All but two returned to the spacecraft immediately. The remaining pair moved approximately 10 feet away and appeared to confer amongst themselves. Though Dawson couldn't comprehend their language, he believed he heard one word that sounded like Jupiter. He had the distinct impression they were discussing whether to take him aboard their craft. Ultimately, they decided against it. Dawson later speculated that had he been younger, they might have chosen to abduct him. The leader made what appeared to be a farewell gesture, passing his palm across his chest. The beings then collected some leaf samples and other materials from the surroundings before half jumping, half floating back into their craft. The hatch closed behind them. The spacecraft rose slowly to an altitude of approximately 75 feet. Then, in the blink of an eye, it vanished. The moment the craft disappeared, Dawson, his dogs and the cattle were released from their paralysis. In a state of panic, Dawson hastily secured his clothing and ran approximately 300 yards uphill to Linda Colby's house. Colby was working in her yard when she saw Dawson approaching at high speed, waving his arms frantically. He was in bad shape, she later told reporters. I saw him coming. He was running at top speed and waving his arms, trying to catch his breath. When he reached her, Dawson was so distraught he could barely speak. His eyes were described as wild and insane. Colby initially thought he might have encountered a venomous snake in the field. She had him sit down and wiped his face with a cool wet cloth. When Dawson finally managed to speak, he could only utter one word: spaceship. Concerned for his health, Colby arranged for Dawson to be transported to Mitchell County Hospital. Medical staff observed that he was having difficulty breathing and speaking. The attending physician noted that Dawson appeared shaken both mentally and physically by whatever he had experienced. He was treated for hysteria, given medication to calm him, and later released. In the days following the incident, a small group of investigators reportedly visited the site of the encounter. They identified themselves as members of Mutual UFO Contact, with one individual claiming to be from Macon County, Georgia. These investigators collected soil samples and took radiation readings at the location. Interestingly, Linda Colby later remarked that these individuals did not appear to be natives of Georgia, noting they had, quote, olive-coloured skin and a foreign look. Some UFO researchers later speculated that these mysterious investigators might have been representatives of the Men in Black phenomenon, rather than actual mutual UFO contact members, though this remains conjecture. Despite the apparent investigation, no formal report was ever published or made available to the public. The case gradually faded from local attention, though it remained memorable to those directly involved. Pelham Police Chief Neely McCormick, when interviewed decades later in 2006, confirmed that he remembered the incident, noting it had made national news at the time, but adding, "It's sort of all died off and nobody talks about it anymore now." When evaluating any extraordinary claim, the credibility of the witness becomes paramount. Those who knew Tom Dawson described him consistently as a respected member of the community, hard-working, kind, and particularly devoted to his daughter. Linda Colby emphasised to reporters that Dawson was not known as a prankster or storyteller, despite the sometimes questionable reputation associated with his former profession as a used car salesman. She and others who observed his condition immediately after the incident were convinced that whatever had happened to him had caused genuine distress. For his part, Dawson maintained the veracity of his account in the face of inevitable scepticism. "I don't care what they say," he stated. "This is the honest truth. I'm not crazy, I wasn't drinking, and I've never had a mental condition. This is the very first time I have ever experienced anything like this." He acknowledged the implausibility of his story, admitting, "I know people won't believe this. I wouldn't believe it myself if it hadn't happened to me." Several months after the incident, researcher Jim Miles travelled to Pelham and spent a Saturday interviewing Dawson, his neighbours, and the paramedics who had responded to the call. Miles found that everyone he spoke with accepted Dawson's account, with none believing that anyone could fake the level of distress Dawson had displayed. Miles later wrote, "This remains George's most bizarre story, and I know something happened to Dawson. I'm just not certain what." The Dawson encounter of August 6, 1977 stands as one of the most peculiar cases in UFO literature. While many elements align with established patterns in close encounter reports, the disc-shaped craft, humanoid entities, paralysis effects, and medical examination procedures, the alleged reference to Jimmy Hoffa introduces an element so bizarre that it tests believability. UFO researcher Jerome Clark, who analysed the case, observed that while it seems absurd to believe Jimmy Hoffa was imprisoned aboard an alien spacecraft, he found Dawson's testimony otherwise credible. "If somebody asked me sometime what UFOs really are," Clark wrote, "I would answer that I think somebody misleads us in a certain way." Perhaps therein lies the most enduring aspect of the Dawson encounter, its resistance to neat categorisation. Whether interpreted as an actual extraterrestrial visitation, a psychological experience, or something else entirely, the case continues to challenge our understanding of reality and perception. What remains certain is that on that August morning in 1977, something profound happened to Tom Dawson, something that left an enduring mark on his life and added a peculiar chapter to the ongoing mystery of human encounters with the unknown.